In 1907, a British archaeologist digging through the ruins of an abandoned Chinese watchtower found a mailbag that never reached its destination. Inside were letters nearly 1,600 years old, written in a script nobody alive could read. One of them, from a woman stranded far from home, pleaded that she would rather die where she was than keep living in poverty. Another was a merchant complaining about exchange rates and arranging his daughter's marriage to a trading partner 1,000 miles away. The letters sat undeciphered for years. When scholars finally cracked the script in the early 20th century, they didn't just translate some old mail. They rediscovered an entire civilization that had quietly controlled trade across the ancient world for over 400 years, and then vanished so completely that history barely remembered its name. This is the story of the Sogdians, and they might be the most influential ancient people you've never heard of. By the end of this video, you'll understand how an entire civilization ran global trade for 4 centuries without ever building an empire, and why that very fact is what made them so easy for history to forget. The letters themselves were found by archaeologist Sir Aurel Stein in 1907, in the ruins of a watchtower near Dunhuang in what is now western China, part of a fortified frontier line that once guarded the western approach to the Jade Gate. Based on later analysis, the letters date to around 312 or 313 CE, making them among the oldest substantial documents ever found written in the Sogdian language. They're preserved today at the British Library, and the Smithsonian's Freer and Sackler galleries later ran an entire digital exhibition project specifically dedicated to piecing together who the Sogdians actually were from evidence like this. The Sogdians came from Sogdiana, a region centered on the oasis cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, in what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. They never built an empire of their own in the traditional sense. No Sogdian army ever conquered Rome or Constantinople. No Sogdian emperor's name gets taught in world history classes alongside Alexander or the Han Dynasty. Instead, they did something arguably harder to pull off and far easier for history to overlook. For roughly 400 years, from around the 4th to the 9th century CE, they became the middlemen who actually made the Silk Road function. Sogdian merchant families operated trading posts in over 50 cities, spanning a network from Constantinople to the heart of China. They didn't just move goods, they moved culture. Sogdian merchants are credited with helping spread Buddhism from India into China, carrying Zoroastrian and Manichaean religious texts across Central Asia, and later facilitating the eastward spread of Christian communities along the same routes. Some of the earliest translations of Buddhist scriptures into Chinese were made by Sogdian monks and translators living in Chinese cities, fluent in both cultures in a way few others of the era were. Their language became a genuine lingua franca of the Silk Road, used by traders who weren't even ethnically Sogdian, simply because it was the language commerce got done in. Here's what made them so effective and so easy for history to erase. They had no interest in ruling the territories they operated in. Instead, across the exact same 400 years, Sogdiana itself was absorbed by a rotating cast of much larger empires, first the Achaemenid Persians, then the successor states of Alexander the Great, later the Kushan Empire, then the Sasanian Persian Empire, and eventually Turkic Khanates from the steppe. Rather than resisting each new ruler, Sogdian merchant communities simply adapted. In China, many took Chinese names and married into local families. In Byzantium, some converted to Christianity. In Persia, they operated comfortably within Zoroastrian court culture. Wherever they operated, they became fluent insiders rather than permanent outsiders, which is precisely what let their trade networks survive the collapse of empire after empire around them. A merchant family with cousins in Samarkand, a warehouse in Chang'an, and a business partner in a Byzantine port didn't need any single one of those empires to remain stable, only enough of the network to keep functioning at any given time. The letters Stein discovered capture this world in strikingly ordinary detail. They read less like ancient artifacts and more like early business correspondence. Complaints about currency exchange rates. Requests to invest in a caravan heading to India. Updates on silk prices in the Chinese market. One writer mentions being abandoned in Dunhuang with no way home. It's an oddly intimate glimpse into lives that were, at the time, utterly unremarkable, which is exactly why they're so valuable now. Most surviving records from this era come from emperors and historians. These come from working merchants worried about money and family, thousands of miles from home. So if the Sogdians were this influential, why did they disappear from popular memory so thoroughly? Part of the answer is structural. Historians studying the region have pointed out that no modern nation-state claims the Sogdians as direct ancestors in the way. Say modern Greece claims ancient Athens, or modern Egypt claims the pharaohs. Modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan sit on Sogdian land. But the political and cultural identity of the region shifted so many times in the centuries since that no single nation inherited the job of championing their memory. Without a nation actively curating and promoting Sogdian history as its own national story, there was simply less institutional momentum keeping their name alive in popular consciousness. Even as academic interest in them has grown substantially in the 21st century, driven largely by projects like the Smithsonian's. The other part of the answer is historical. Beginning in the 7th and 8th centuries, the Arab conquest of Central Asia brought Sogdiana under Islamic rule, and the region gradually Islamized over the following centuries. The decisive turning point for the wider region's balance of power came in 751 CE, at the Battle of Talas, where Abbasid Arab forces defeated Tang Chinese forces near the Sogdians' own homeland, a battle that helped cement Islamic influence across Central Asia and gradually shifted trade patterns that Sogdian networks had dominated for centuries. Sogdian merchant communities didn't vanish overnight, but over the following generations, they were gradually absorbed into the Persian and Turkic Islamic culture that came to dominate the region, their language slowly giving way to Persian as the new lingua franca of Central Asian trade. By the time later chapters of Silk Road history are being written, in the era of the Mongol Empire and Marco Polo centuries afterward, the Sogdians as a distinct, identifiable trading culture had already quietly dissolved into the broader populations around them. What's left is scattered but genuinely remarkable. Elaborate wall paintings in the ruins of Panjikent, a Sogdian city in modern Tajikistan, sometimes called the Pompeii of Central Asia, depicting vivid scenes of feasting, epic mythology, and daily aristocratic life in colors that have survived over 1,000 years underground. There are rock inscriptions left by Sogdian traders in the remote mountain valleys of what is now northern Pakistan, marking a route that has otherwise left almost no written trace. And there are documents like Stein's letters, preserved by nothing more than the dry desert air and pure archaeological accident. 3 separate categories of evidence that only really came together into a coherent picture of Sogdian civilization through sustained scholarly work over the past century. The Sogdians ran one of the most important trade networks in human history for 4 centuries, quietly moving goods, religions, and ideas between civilizations that otherwise barely knew each other existed. And they came astonishingly close to being erased from that history entirely, saved largely by a mailbag that never reached the family it was addressed to. That's often how it works. Empires get remembered because someone carved their victories into stone. The people actually connecting the world sometimes just leave behind an undelivered letter, and hope somebody eventually learns to read it. The Unwritten Record, some of history's biggest stories were never written down at all. Subscribe because the next lost chapter is coming.